All right, so who's the best player for each position for the Halos this season? We're going to figure that out together, figure out who needs to play the most in 2023. It's time to get locked on with Mike and John, and this is Locked On Angels.
You are Locked On Angels, your daily Los Angeles Angels podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
John and I thank you for making Locked On Angels your first listen every day. Every show is free and available on all platforms like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And you can help us out by giving us a rate and a review. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure that you're subscribed and click the bell to be notified every time a new episode drops. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started.
Thanks for being here with us for this episode of Locked On Angels, where it's your team every day. You've got the Frisch Brothers here with you, a.k.a. the Super Halo Bros. My name is John, and that's my brother Mike.
And my name is Mike, and that's my brother John.
It's that time of the preseason, Michael. We need to put together this roster. We have to figure out who's starting where, who is going to get the most time at each position and in the rotation. Of course, we got to talk about the bullpen. We're going to talk about all of that, and if you have any thoughts about this, be sure to get them in for Fan Mail Friday on Friday, and we'll answer your questions then. You can do that by getting at us at Locked On Angels on Twitter and at Super Halo Bros on Twitter and Instagram. But let's start with, the most likely, easiest positions, and that is actually the starting rotation, Mike.
Yeah.
So let's get into that.
Let's talk about Shohei Ohtani. Obviously, he's the ace, and here's a great tweet from former Locked On Angels host Brett McGuire. He's 11 pitchers, had a minimum of 50 innings, had 4 pitches that rated average or better by Stuff Plus in 2022.
Stuff Plus.
Stuff Plus is great. Only 3 pitchers had 5 pitches that rated average or better. The only pitcher with 6, Johnny, one Shohei Ohtani. His Stuff Plus numbers are incredible. So 100's average. So here's his splitter, 163. His slider, 137. His fastball, 115. Sinker, 106. Curveball, 101. And his cutter, 100. Based on this info, I think maybe we should go with Ohtani as the ace of the staff this year. What do you think, John?
I considered it, Mike, and I feel like that's a pretty good choice. So we'll go with Shohei Ohtani. It sounds like Patrick Sandoval is going to be the number 2 based on the fact that he's going to pitch in the home opener, and that's kind of how the schedule shakes out. So it sounds like my boy Sandy is going to be the one after Shohei Ohtani, which is pretty cool. He's had 1 spring training outing so far, and he struck out 6. Sunday, he started for Team Mexico. Looked like a stud against an all-star lineup, which brings so much joy to my heart.
Yes.
To know that Patrick Sandoval has been such a stud and will continue to be in 2023. That leaves the question, Tyler Anderson or Reed Detmers at number 3. Which one do you see there, Mike?
I think that the best move might actually be Tyler Anderson because you're coming off of a really difficult pitcher, hard-throwing pitcher in Patrick Sandoval, and I think Tyler Anderson's soft stuff will actually be a great 1-2 punch with Sandy, and then you follow that up with Reed Detmers, who's hitting 96, 97 on the radar gun on his fastball. His slider is at 89 to 91, and he's been consistent all spring training, and so I think that it would be good to go Ohtani, Sandoval, Anderson, and then Detmers.
I like that back and forth between, a hard-throwing person and then a soft-throwing person, and then back to a hard-throwing pitcher once more. Then you've got Jose Suarez, and he's kind of the wild card because has he grown enough since last season?
Yeah.
What is it that he needs to do? Well, one thing that's encouraging is the walks have come down, but I feel like there's 3 key things to Jose Suarez. He needs to throw strikes.
Yep.
He's got to stay focused. He can't take forever anymore between pitches because of the pitch clock, and he needs to minimize the amount of pitches he's thrown per inning. I think those are 3 key things for Jose Suarez. Here's something that I hadn't considered, and somebody on Twitter reached out to us about it. What if somebody like Tucker Davidson or Griffin Canning or even Chase Silseth gets the number 5 spot and Jose Suarez moves to number 6? Now, I think out of the gate, we're going to see Suarez in that 5th spot. But I don't think that they'll wait too long for things to go bad. Not that I think they'll be awful.
Sure.
But I could easily see, especially the fact that he doesn't have any options left, Tucker Davidson taking that 5th spot and saving start number 6 for Jose Suarez. If that doesn't happen the way it does, I really think Davidson is probably the most likely candidate here, just based on the fact that he's out of options. Perry Minasian doesn't want to let go of a guy he traded for, and he's had a pretty stellar spring training so far, Mike.
Yeah, and he's been working on what they call the sweeper, and that's just a fancy word for like a curve slider combination. And he has really seen that be effective, and he's been the Angels' most effective starter. I know that Ohtani hasn't had too many starts in spring training. We're not comparing him to Ohtani. We're comparing him to other pitchers, and he's been their most effective. Griffin Canning's looked really good, John.
Yeah, it's true.
And on Tuesday, Chase Silseth looked really good. But I think that Davidson having the most innings and the way that they've thrown him out there as often as they have, I think you're right. I think he's the guy. And it's not just because they don't want to DFA him and because they traded for him. I think he actually is the best option, John. And that's what they've said over and over and over again. We want the best option at every position. And right now, Tucker looks like the best option. And I think you can give Griffin Canning and Chase Silseth some time in the minor leagues to build up arm strength, to work on their stuff, and then bring them up when necessary. And you do bring up an interesting point about Jose Suarez. Jose has struggled in the first half, and he's been really great in the second half. And I wonder if they're going to keep an eye on that, because you could see maybe a starting rotation of Davidson and then Canning, because Suarez needs to work on some things in the minor leagues, or they move him to a long reliever role, which he's really been successful at in the last few years. And so I think that there's some options there. I have been of the opinion the first 5 are like cemented in, but when you bring up what you brought up, it makes me begin to think about maybe they're not as cemented in as I would assume right now.
I think that having options is great. It's better than not having any options at all, which is where the Angels have been in the past. So I think that the fact that we're talking about this is pretty cool. So I really like the construction of this rotation, though. Shohei Ohtani, Patrick Sandoval, Tyler Anderson, Reed Detmers, and then Jose Suarez out of the gate. But we could see Tucker Davidson get that 5th spot if things don't go according to plan. I don't know. We'll see how that shakes out, but at least we know who the top 4 would be. And as far as the Super Halo Bros go, I think that our top 4 is locked in as well. Hey, coming up on Locked On Angels, has Ben Joyce forced his way into the opening day roster with that heater of a fastball? We're going to talk about that coming up.
Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. The push for the NBA playoffs is here, and now's the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use, and then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores to threes made. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay, so don't miss your chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA.
Thanks for making Locked On Angels your first listen today, and we're continuing our conversation on creating the best possible roster for the Angels in 2023. Now it's time to talk about the outfield and the infield. Of course, the outfield is pretty set in stone. I think that's the one thing that we can count on. That outfield of Renfroe in right, Ward in left, and Mike Trout in center field. And, there's kind of a question of whether Brett Phillips might get that 4th outfielder spot just because his spring has not been that great. However, you and I have talked about this already. We feel like Moniak and Adele could really benefit from having time in AAA just so they're getting everyday reps. They're constantly at the plate working on things. They're constantly in the outfield working on things. So we feel pretty good about Brett Phillips at the 4th outfielder spot. I know somebody mentioned, could somebody else sneak in there, like a Jake Lamb who can play the infield and the outfield. But I also feel like as far as our infield, there's a lot of guys who can do both. They're not particularly set in stone as outfielders, but if you needed them to fill in a pinch, they could also do that. But here's what Rhett Bollinger tweeted out about Mike Trout. It was a quote from Nolan Arenado. Of course, they're on Team USA together, on what Mike Trout brings to the clubhouse. He said, he's bringing the best player in the world into the clubhouse. He's a great teammate, talking about the game. He's always willing to talk about hitting, and he works hard, man. This guy works his butt off. Now I know why he's the greatest. Trout is set to have a fantastic year, Mike. I really hope he stays healthy and that we get him for, the entire season this time rather than having a month and a half off there without Mike Trout. But how about this infield?
I think the infield is mostly set. I think third base is set. Obviously, Anthony Rendon is going to play there. And remember, according to the numbers, his success equals the Angels' success.
That's right.
And so Anthony Rendon at third base is, I think, a lock. And he's had a really great spring training, John. And then there's Jared Walsh at first base, who hit a home run on Tuesday, his first of the spring. And Walshamania is back. And I think Urshela and Drury will most likely be the backup to Walsh. They might play when it's a lefty on the mound. And then catcher, John, is still a question, but I think Logan O'Hoppe is winning over Phil Nevin and GMPM, and I think that Stassi is probably going to be the guy that backs him up. I don't think it'll be a typical starter backup. I think that we'll see maybe both guys about the same amount of time, and then depending on what offense they bring, I think you'll see that guy rise to the top. And so I think Logan O'Hoppe is going to be the starter out of the gate, but I think that Max Stassi is going to give some push there. The questions in the infield are at second base and at shortstop. So, John, let's talk through the options at second and at short.
Yeah, you start with Gio Urshela, who Sam Blum had a great article about in The Athletic. He lost 10 pounds this offseason, so he can be quicker and be a little bit more viable at the position. He's got 602 Major League games, and only 43 of those games have been at shortstop. But Urshela did say, if you can play me shortstop, you can play me anywhere, which I think is cool. Wherever they put me in, I'll be fine. I feel very comfortable playing there, so he's certainly an option. Of course, he will also, kind of platoon back up with Walsh, maybe play some third if Rendon needs a day off. So regardless of where he ends up playing, we are going to see a lot of Gio Urshela. We're going to see a lot of Brandon Drury as well. But next, let's talk about David Fletcher. And Mike, as a guy who was an everyday starter for us for most of his career, he's fourth on the pecking order at this point? I feel like perhaps while his glove is probably the best out of everybody, he's the most capable of playing shortstop other than Velasquez. David Fletcher is probably not the everyday starter at this point. And here's the thing. He offers the best in terms of defense. He's a good 9-hole hitter. He can turn the lineup over for you. He can move runners over even if it's an out. He can get guys to go from second to third or first to second. The thing is, though, the power and the overall stuff in terms of his offensive metrics, they've been really low the last 2 years. Part of that's injury. Part of that is he just hasn't been on the field. He had a 622 OPS in 2021 and 621 in 2022. There was a time where he was, on a hot streak in 2021 from about June till the middle of July, and he was just tearing it up in terms of batting average and base hits. He got both of his home runs from 2021 against the Mariners, and those were the only two he hit all season. So Fletcher, to me, I don't think is quite the starter he used to be.
Yeah, he seems like he is kind of moved down in the rotation, and you're right, he brings the best defense out of all of these guys, but not the greatest offense. I think the greatest offense is actually Brandon Drury, who had 28 home runs last year, an 813 OPS. I mean, the guy has always been an above average replacement off the bench or even as a starter, but he's not a prototypical defensive shortstop. He hasn't played there all that much. He's played more second base and third base. And then the other offensive bat is Luis Rengifo. And Rengifo had 17 home runs, and he saw his strikeout percentage dip about 8% from his rookie season last season. And so that's exciting. And he did post negative runs above average and outs above average at all three infield positions last year, meaning that he wasn't fantastic defensively. So we know the options. We know who's available. Johnny, if you had to call it right now, who is the player that needs to play at second base the most this season?
I think it's going to be Brandon Drury. I think for him to bring the offense that he does, especially as a second baseman. I mean, you don't have second baseman hitting 28 home runs a year, Mike. And maybe he won't hit that again this season. I'm going to speak it into existence and say that he will do that again.
Come on.
However, that's just hitting way above your typical second baseman. And so I think that he's probably the best option there. I also feel like Luis Rengifo is going to get a lot of opportunities there if David Fletcher is playing shortstop, or perhaps Gio Urshela. So I would imagine that you'll see Urshela at short and you'll see Drury and Rengifo over at second base. And we've said it before, Eric Ibar, when he first came up, was not a fantastic shortstop defensively. However, he became one of the best we've ever had.
Yeah.
And that just came with time. It just came with experience. And I could see that happening for Rengifo as well. Now that he knows what his role is going to be on this team, I really think that's going to factor into how well he plays the position in 2023. How about third base? Who's playing third base the most?
I think that it's going to be Rendon for sure. I think Rendon is going to be the guy that we can count on at third base. And I think that because Rendon's going to be at third base, I think that the shortstop position is going to be Rengifo. And the reason why I think it's going to be Rengifo is because he doesn't need to be stellar at short because he's going to have Rendon at third base. I just think that this guy needs reps. And I think what we learned last year is that the more time in and the more at bats that he gets, the more he actually improves. And I think with Gio Urshela bouncing around in that infield and David Fletcher, I think I'd rather see Drury at second base and I would rather see Rengifo at shortstop. And I think what Rengifo brings is he brings some fire, he brings some passion, and he's a guy that really wants to prove himself. And so I would love to see him play the most at short with Rendon at third and Brandon Drury at second base, and of course Jared Walsh at first base.
Phil Nevin had a quote here, and he said that when he was asked at the outset of camp if he'd prefer a set shortstop going into the season, he said, "We've got a lot of guys that can get out there. I do like the fact that I do like the fact that there's some competition among these guys. I like the fact that we have a lot of guys that can do it." So again, all very capable stars, all very capable of playing very different positions from the outfield to the infield. So we feel pretty good about those positions. Let us know what you think. We'd love to hear from you. Comment below on the YouTube video if you're watching there, or get at us at Locked On Angels on Twitter. Let us know your thoughts about the outfield and the infield.
There's a lot of questions about this team in the bullpen, John, and let's talk about the bullpen and start with a quote from Perry Manassian. He said, "Looking back at the construction of this team, instead of pouring all of our resources into the back end bullpen reliever, we felt like we could spread it out a little bit, just become a really deep bullpen. It gives us a better opportunity." And it sounds like he's addressing the decision to trade Raisel Iglesias because Iglesias is making $16 million, while Estevez and Moore are making a combination of almost $15 million. And then I loved this quote from Perry. He said, "The way we look at our bullpen is a bullpen is an everyday player. You better like what comes out the door when it opens." And so I like that quote, and I like the bullpen he's put together, even though we do have some questions. I think that there's probably 8 spots in the bullpen, give or take. I think there's 8 guys. So I'm going to say that the for sures are Loop, Tepera, Herget, Moore, and Estevez. And I think that there are 3 spots that are open. And the options, Johnny, are Jaime Barria, who doesn't have any options. You can't send him down. Tucker Davidson, now he might be that 6th starter, but we also might have him in the bullpen. He has no options. Andrew Wantz is going to be there, but he has 2 options to come up and come down and then come up and come back down again. And then Jose Quijada has no options to go to the minor leagues. So those 4, I think, are fighting for those 3 spots. The one you don't want to forget about is somebody named Ben Joyce, John. And Brett McGuire tweeted out something about Ben Joyce. Why don't you read that?
Yeah, he said one of the things to consider that we should consider in terms of the bullpen is based on the current configuration of the Angels bullpen. I'm not sure how Ben Joyce doesn't make the opening day roster. That fastball slider combo looks fantastic right now. So
yeah,
a ringing endorsement from Brent for sure.
Right. And so that makes things tough. Having Ben as somebody that they're considering makes things really difficult. So what do you do with this bullpen? Who gets the last 3 spots? And if you give one of them to Ben Joyce, then you're going to have to DFA somebody. So, John, I'm going to throw this to you first.
Of course.
And so I can think about it. Are you keeping Ben Joyce is the first question. And if so, then what are you doing with the other guys? Or are you sending Ben Joyce down? And then who are you selecting from those 4 names that we had talked about for your bullpen?
Mike, I think my gut reaction right now is let Ben Joyce cook a little bit more until you need him. I think that rolling into the season with the 5 guys that are for sure's here, Loop, Tepera, Herget, Moore, Estevez. And then what's tricky is Jaime Barria, who is a great long reliever. He steps in when they need a spot start. Tucker Davidson, who we've actually talked about perhaps coming out of the bullpen because he gets through a 1 through 9 like one time pretty well, and then he does struggle a bit after they see him again. And maybe that's my hang up there. I feel like, this is kind of going back to the starting rotation again, but I'd like to see Tucker Davidson face a lineup more than once before we can say, hey, he's the guy. Like, this is who we need to roll with. I love Andrew Wantz. I feel like if anybody's going to go here and perhaps maybe Ben Joyce takes a spot, I feel like Andrew Wantz is the guy that you can bring down. But then what do you do about Jose Quijada? He doesn't have any options either. And he's a hard-throwing lefty, and he has been cooking in the WBC. So this is a tough one, man. I just don't know. I feel like you got to keep Jaime around. You got to keep Quijada around. So it really comes down to that last spot. Unless, they make some moves in another area. But I just don't know how this is going to shape up right now. But if I had to go with my gut, I'm saying Barria, Davidson, and Quijada are the ones that I'm sticking with for the bullpen. And perhaps Davidson is kind of doing the swingman thing. I'm not sure how to put that, but yeah, I don't know. I don't want to see anybody go at the moment, and especially get DFA'd. But what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think that they're going to DFA anybody because I think they want depth. And that has been Perry Manassian's vision for this team all offseason. And so I think Ben Joyce does go down to the minor leagues. And I know that we're talking about the best options. And I know that he's got a really great fastball and he's got a really great breaking ball. I still think that there's a whole lot of growth that Ben Joyce needs to have
and can
in
benefit
his repertoire
from.
And just as a pitcher. And so I would rather have him grow a bit, and then you could bring him up in June, then you could bring him up in July, or maybe you bring him up in August, and he could be somebody that could really cause a lot of problems for other teams. He's got a really great fastball. You have that in Carlos Estevez and Jose Quijada. Not that they're reaching 100 miles an hour or a little bit more than that, although Lindsey Crosby did say that when he got to 105, the radar gun was pretty hot when he was in that stadium. Yeah. But I think that what we have in Ben Joyce is a gem, and I think that he still has some really hard edges to be chiseled off. Sure. And so I would like to see what this bullpen can do in the first month or first 2 months. And if they're just struggling, then I think that you can go, all right, bring Joyce up, and then you can DFA somebody, move some pieces around. But I don't think that anybody's going to get DFA'd immediately because depth is the thing that Perry Manassian keeps preaching this offseason and as we head into 2023.
And that's really what it comes down to is these rosters are not set in stone. And so if they get into a month and they find that, oh, man, we really could use Ben Joyce and we've kind of exasperated all we can out of Jaime Barria. Maybe they make a trade to another team for him or something like that. It's gonna be a fluid situation, right, throughout the season in terms of moving people up and moving people down. Perhaps you find that you don't need one of your bench pieces, and so you can make a move there and bring up another bullpen arm if you need to. They have to get creative this season, and they're going to have to be creative this season in terms of who's up and who's down and who's playing and who's not. And again, it's a very fluid situation. These are the guys we would start the season with, but we're definitely open to seeing that change after a month or so, especially when they figure out where their needs are once they start playing meaningful baseball games.
Well, thanks for making Locked On Angels your first listen today. And now for your second listen, check out the Locked On Fantasy Baseball podcast. You can win your league by listening to Matt and Dom every single day. They bring some of the best strategies for your team. You can find the Locked On Fantasy Baseball podcast wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. And they are a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right. Be sure you get at us at Locked On Angels on Twitter and at Super Halo Bros on Twitter and Instagram, because we want to hear from you and what you think. How do you feel about the roster we've put together and decided on? We want the best players out there, but maybe you think that there are other best players, and that's totally reasonable. And we'd love to hear from you about that. So please get at us. Hey, Mike, what do we have on deck for tomorrow?
Well, we've got high hopes, John, and it's not just because we're Angel fans and it's spring training and that's just what we do. We actually have high
delusional.
Hopes, right? We have high hopes for this team, but we also have concerns. And so tomorrow we're sharing the things that bring us hope, and we're talking about the things that give us some concerns about this Angel team. So join us tomorrow as we talk about the hopes and concerns on Locked On Angels.
All right, friends, we thank you for being here with us, and we hope that you'll join us again. Until then, my name is John, and that's my brother Mike.
And my name is Mike, and that's my brother John.
That's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Angels, and we will see you back here tomorrow.